Question sent. List 1 showcases characters, while list 2 identifies the literary works they belong to. Make sure to link each character to the correct title. List 1, character A, Christophine. B, Zilla. C, Estella. D, Ekwafi. List 2, work. 1, Wuthering Heights. 2, Wide Sargasso Sea. 3, Things Fall Apart. 4, Great Expectations. Ready to see the correct matches? Here they are. A, Christophine is from 2, Wide Sargasso Sea. B, Zilla can be found in 1, Wuthering Heights. C, Estella is a pivotal character in 4, Great Expectations. D, Ekwefi plays a crucial role in 3, Things Fall Apart. Let's unpack why these pairings are accurate. All right, here's a more informal breakdown of Jean Riss's Wide Sargasso Sea, which is a clever twist on Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. This novel digs into the life of Bertha Mason, who Rhys renames Antoinette Mason. She's a West Indian woman stuck in a sad, messed-up marriage with Mr. Rochester in chilly England. Antoinette's story is told from Jamaica to the gloomy attic of Thornfield, where she spirals into madness. We see the tale through Antoinette's eyes in parts 1 and 3, and from Mr. Rochester's view in part 2. It's a deep dive into her life before the events of Jane Eyre. Why it matters for UGC NET exam. It's a prime example of post-colonial literature and a feminist reinterpretation of classic works, both critical areas of study. Summary of Wide Sargasso Sea, Part 1, Culebri, Jamaica. We start in Jamaica, post-slavery in 1834. Young Antoinette describes how her family hit rock bottom financially. Her mom, Annette, marries this rich English dude, Mr. Mason. Things go south when their estate gets torched by freed slaves, and Antoinette's brother Pierre dies. Annette's mental health tanks, and she dies neglected. Antoinette tries to connect with her, but it's a no-go. Part 2, Honeymoon in Dominica. Now we're on Antoinette and Mr. Rochester's honeymoon in Dominica, and it's a mess from the start. They're both suspicious of each other, and some guy claiming to be Antoinette's half-brother, Daniel, smears her name and shakes Mr. Rochester down for money. Christophine, Antoinette's nurse, doesn't trust Mr. Rochester one bit. The dude cheats, gets mean, and even changes Antoinette's name to Bertha. Desperate, Antoinette turns to Christophine for a love potion, but it just makes things worse. Mr. Rochester plans to ditch the place. Part 3, Life in England. Now known as Bertha, Antoinette is locked up in Thornfield Hall's attic, watched by the servant, Grace Poole. England is bleak for her, and her marriage is in shambles. She reaches out to her stepbrother Richard for help, but legally, he's hands off. After she snaps and attacks Rochester, she ends up forgetting it even happened. Haunted by dreams of flames and longing for freedom, she eventually meets her fate by setting fire to everything. This novel really flips Jane Eyre on its head, giving a voice to a previously misunderstood character, which is pretty groundbreaking for its time and super relevant for UGC NET studies. All right, here's a casual rundown of Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. Written in 1847 under the fake name Ellis Bell, this novel stands out for its intense imagination, skipping the usual author commentary, and its unique storytelling style. It kicks off with Lockwood, a bit of an outsider, who sets the stage for the main drama that housekeeper Ellen Dean spills about what's been going down at the estates. The story centers on Heathcliff, an orphan who shakes up the lives of the Earnshaw and Linton families in a remote part of Yorkshire during the late 18th century. Heathcliff's pretty bitter because he's treated badly and loses his true love, Cathy Earnshaw, to Edgar Linton, a nicer, richer guy. Heathcliff's heartbreak turns into a lifelong grudge against everyone involved, dragging the families through a revenge saga that lasts generations. Even after Cathy dies giving birth, Heathcliff can't shake her off, staying obsessed until he bites the dust too. Eventually things chill out when the younger Earnshaws and Lintons get together. Why it matters for UGC NET exam. The novel's inventive narrative style, depth of characterization, and exploration of themes like revenge, love, and societal norms make it a significant study in English literature. Characters in Wuthering Heights. Heathcliff. This guy from Liverpool turns into a vengeful lover and takes over the heights. Catherine, Heathcliff's main squeeze, ends up marrying Edgar and dies after having her daughter, Cathy Linton. Cathy's hubby, the polar opposite of Heathcliff, super into his family, eventually kicks the bucket. She tells a big chunk of the story, works for the Earnshaws and Lintons, sees everything. Isabella Linton. Edgar's sis unhappily marries Heathcliff, gets away from his abuse, and ends up dying in London. Hindley Earnshaw. Cathy's bro makes Heathcliff's life hell, ends up ruined by grief, and dies. Hindley's kid, rough start with no education or inheritance, but ends up with Cathy. Cathy Linton. Cathy and Edgar's kid first marries Linton, then ends up loving Hareton. Linton Heathcliff. Heathcliff's and Isabella's son, weak and sickly, marries Cathy, dies young. Old servant, super religious, but not exactly the nicest guy, hard to understand with his dialect. Starts the whole story, rents the Grange, figures he's better off around people than alone. Hindley's wife dies not long after having Hareton, not taken too seriously. Mr. and Mrs. Earnshaw, Cathy's and Hindley's parents. Mr. Earnshaw is kind of into Heathcliff. Mr. and Miss Linton raise Edgar and Isabella to be proper. Mr. Linton is a judge. Local doctor in Gimmerton, pals with Hindley, around during sick times. Zillah works for Heathcliff after Cathy's gone, not a fan of young Cathy. Mr. Green, Edgar's lawyer, turns on him to help Heathcliff snag the inheritance. This book gives a complex and dark look at how love and revenge can mess up lives, making it a timeless piece to dive into, especially for UGC net preppers. All right, here's a chilled-out version of Charles Dickens' Great Expectations, which first popped up in a series in All the Year Round back in 1860-61, and then came out as a book in 1861. It's one of Dickens's top hits, both critically and among fans. The story covers the life and times of Pip, an orphan figuring out life, and dives into big themes like social class and what makes a person valuable. Why it matters for UGC net exam. It's a fantastic example of Victorian literature, exploring themes of personal growth, social structure, and morality, all crucial for deep literary analysis. Summary of Great Expectations. Pip kicks off the story talking about his younger days from somewhere in his future. Grows up in the Kent marshes with his sister and her husband, Joe Gargery. Bumps into Abel Magwitch, a runaway convict in the graveyard. Sneaks him some food and a file to help him out. Both Magwitch and his rival Compeyson get caught eventually. Drops by Miss Havisham's place, who got stood up at the altar. Meets Estella at her spooky old house, Satis House, and totally falls for her. Feels embarrassed about his low-key background and dreams of being a fancy gentleman. Starts as Joe's apprentice, but really hopes for a posh life. Lawyer Jaggers comes out of the blue to tell Pip he's got a secret sponsor. Heads to London, thinking Miss Havisham is his mysterious helper. Learns the ropes of being a gentleman with Herbert Pocket's help. The big twist, his real benefactor is Abel Magwitch, not Miss Havisham. Tries to sneak out of England with Magwitch to dodge the cops. Calls out Miss Havisham for letting him believe she was his benefactor. Tells Estella he loves her, but she's set to marry some dude named Drummle. Finds out Magwitch is Estella's dad, and Compeyson was Havisham's old flame. Gets tight with Magwitch, starts to really respect him. Magwitch has a showdown with Compeyson on the Thames. Compeyson ends up drowning. Magwitch gets busted, sentenced, and dies before they can execute him. Pip gets super sick, racks up debt, but Joe comes to the rescue and pays up. Hears about Miss Havisham's death, realizes Joe cleared his debts. Ends up working in Cairo for Herbert's company, finally finds some peace. Comes back to England after over a decade. Checks out the old ruins of Satis House, runs into Estella, now a widow. They think they won't split up again, hinting they might stick together. The whole book is about Pip's growth from a naive kid to a wiser adult, tackling issues like justice and second chances. Estella also shows some change, warming up a bit by the end. It wraps up, leaving us guessing what's next for Pip and Estella. It's a rich study for anyone diving into classic literature, especially for the UGC net exam, thanks to its layered themes and character developments. Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, dropped in 1958, kicked off a huge wave of Nigerian literature in the 60s. This key novel paints the story of Okonkwo, a big shot in his Igbo community. His life turns upside down after he accidentally kills someone, leading to a 7-year exile. When he returns, he finds his village totally changed by the invasion of European missionaries and colonial powers in the 1890s. Achebe sticks to traditional storytelling but spices it up with Igbo sayings, showing both Okonkwo and his village's breakdown. It's a standout book for its deep dive into local beliefs and how a society crumbles psychologically under pressure. Why it matters for UGC NET exam. Achebe's novel is crucial for understanding post-colonial literature and the dynamics between indigenous cultures and European colonization, a big deal for literary studies. Characters in Things Fall Apart, Big Man in Umuofia, all about that macho life, terrified of being a failure. Okonkwo's second wife, kind of does her own thing against his wishes. Unoka, Okonkwo's dad, didn't really live up to the tough guy image. Anwoye, Okonkwo's son, ditches dad's hardcore ways for Christianity. Kid taken in by Okonkwo ends up killed as the village decided. Zinzinma, Okonkwo's favorite daughter, breaks the mold for what women should be. Okonkwo's buddy who actually thinks about whether their traditions make sense. Priestess with a double life. The old wise man in the village gives out advice. Mr. Brown, the nice English missionary who tries to get along with the Igbo, is Smith, the tough missionary, way stricter than Mr. Brown. This novel really digs into how traditions clash with new influences, making it a goldmine for discussions in literature, especially for exams like the UGC NET, where understanding cultural impacts in literature is key. Question 72. List 1 includes novels, while List 2 features their subtitles. Ensure each novel is matched with its corresponding subtitle. List 1 novel, A. The Castle of Otranto. B. Tess of the D'Urbervilles. C. Frankenstein. D. Vanity Fair. 1. A Pure Woman. 2. The Modern Prometheus. 3. A novel without a hero. 4. A Gothic story. Here's the answer. A. The Castle of Otranto is known as 4. A Gothic story. B. Tess of the D'Urbervilles is subtitled 1. A Pure Woman. C. Frankenstein carries the subtitle 2. The Modern Prometheus. D. Vanity Fair is described as 3. A novel without a hero. Let's explore further why these connections make sense. The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole kicked off the whole Gothic novel scene when it dropped anonymously in 1764. Walpole slapped the label Gothic right on it in its second edition subtitle, and it's been a big deal in English lit ever since. The plot's about a creepy prophecy saying that the rulership of Otranto will end when the real owner gets too big for the castle. When Prince Manfred's son Conrad dies, crushed by a giant helmet right before he's supposed to marry Princess Isabella, things get wild. Manfred, trying to keep his grip on power, decides to marry Isabella himself, and even ends up accidentally killing his own daughter, Matilda. The story twists when it turns out that Theodore, just some peasant, is actually the rightful heir, thanks to being the grandson of the king, Manfred's granddad, offed for the throne. It wraps up with Manfred stepping down and Theodore taking over, marrying Isabella, despite being sad about Matilda. Why it matters for UGC NET exam. It's the first Gothic novel and sets the stage for loads of themes and styles that define the genre, like haunted castles, dark family secrets, and eerie prophecies. Tess of the D'Urbervilles, A Pure Woman, by Thomas Hardy, started as a serial in 1891 in the Graphic, then hit bookshelves in the same year, stirring up all kinds of chatter because of its upfront criticism of Victorian sexual morals. It's now hailed as a top-tier 19th century book. Tess Durbeyfield, a girl from a poor family who finds out they have noble roots, tries to connect with the rich D'Urbervilles. That's where she meets Alec D'Urberville, who tricks her into a relationship, resulting in a child, Sorrow, who sadly dies young. Tess later marries Angel Clare, who ditches her when he hears about her past. Down on her luck, Tess hooks back up with Alec. But when Angel returns wanting to patch things up, Tess, fed up with how unfair her life's been, kills Alec and ends up getting caught and executed. Why it matters for UGC NET exam. Hardy's work dives deep into the struggles against social norms and the tragic impacts of societal pressures, key themes in modern literary studies and critiques. Both novels are stellar examples of their genres and dive into the social and personal conflicts that make them rich studies for something like the UGC NET, where understanding the evolution of literary themes and forms is crucial. Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, by Mary Shelley, tells the gripping story of Victor Frankenstein, a scientist who figures out how to bring life to dead matter. Victor builds a creature using parts from corpses but freaks out at how hideous it looks and ditches it. Feeling lonely and hated, the creature turns bitter and ends up killing Victor's brother, William, his buddy, Henry Clerval, and his wife, Elizabeth, on their wedding night. Driven by a thirst for revenge against the creature, Victor chases it all the way to the Arctic. There, while telling his wild story to Captain Robert Walton, Victor passes away from exhaustion and illness. The creature, full of regret for all the pain caused, decides to end his life and vanishes into the cold darkness. The novel wraps up themes of ambition, responsibility, and the search for understanding. Why It Matters for UGC Net Exam. Frankenstein is a cornerstone of Gothic literature and science fiction, offering deep insights into themes like creator responsibility and the consequences of unchecked ambition, essential for literary analysis. Vanity Fair, a novel without a hero, by William Makepeace Thackeray, spans from 1847 to 1848 and was his first major work under his real name. It pulls some vibes from John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, poking at the moral decay in early 19th century English society. The story contrasts two women, the gentle Amelia Sedley and the sharp-witted Becky Sharp, who pretty much steals the show. As Amelia deals with a rocky marriage to George Osborne, who almost cheats with Becky, and Becky schemes her way up the social ladder by marrying Rawdon Crawley, we dive into loyalty, betrayal, and social climbing. Even with Becky's shady moves, things kind of sort out. Amelia ends up happy with Captain William Dobbin, and Becky turns to a more respectable, charitable life, showing Thackeray's complex take on morality in what he calls Vanity Fair. Why It Matters for UGC Net Exam. Thackeray's Vanity Fair is a rich study in character dynamics and societal critique, exploring how personal ambitions interact with social ethics, a key theme in understanding 19th century literature. Both books are crucial in their respective genres, offering rich analyses of human motives and societal structures, making them important for literature studies, especially for exams like the UGC Net, where a deep understanding of thematic development in literature is crucial. Question 73. List 1 comprises literary devices, while List 2 provides definitions. Match them accurately to understand each device better. List 1, literary device. A, hyperbole. B, metonymy. C, synecdoche. D, periphrasis. List 2, definition. 1, referring to something by the name of something else that is closely connected with it. 2, a roundabout or indirect manner of writing or speaking. 3, a figure of speech in which a part represents the whole. 4, an intentional exaggeration for emphasis or comic effect. And the answer A, hyperbole is all about 4, an intentional exaggeration for emphasis or comic effect. B, metonymy is defined as 1, referring by closely connected names. C, synecdoche means 3, a part representing the whole. D, periphrasis involves 2, a roundabout or indirect manner of speaking. Let's dive into the explanations for clarity. Hyperbole. This is when you go all out with your exaggerations to make a point or get a few laughs. Example 1, I wandered lonely as a cloud. Explanation. This line is from William Wordsworth's poem Daffodils. Here, Wordsworth isn't just feeling a little solo, he's comparing his alone time to floating solo like a cloud. It's his dramatic way of showing how deep his isolation goes while he's out and about. Example 2, I could eat a horse. In Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal, this line cranks up the shock value to make a point. Swift has his narrator suggest that poor Irish folks might as well sell their kids for food. It's a wild exaggeration to highlight how desperate and ridiculous the situation is. Why It Matters for UGC Net Exam. Hyperbole is a staple in literature to deliver impact or humor. Recognizing it helps in understanding an author's tone and intent, super useful for literary analysis. Metonymy. This is when you mention something by a related term instead of its actual name to spice things up or make a point. 1, the pen is mightier than the sword. Explanation. This famous line by Edward Bulwer Lytton isn't about a literal pen fighting a sword. The pen stands for writing or ideas, and the sword for fighting or force. It's a slick way of saying ideas have more power than brute force. Example 2, the crown will find an heir. Explanation. In the world of Shakespeare, the crown doesn't mean just a shiny headpiece. It represents the whole monarchy or royal authority. So, saying the crown will find an heir is a shorthand for saying the royal family will continue. Why it matters for UGC Net exam. Metonymy pops up a lot in literature to link ideas and physical objects, making understanding it key for dissecting how texts build meaning and convey themes. Both hyperbole and metonymy are essential figures of speech that spice up a text and deepen its meaning, making them important topics for anyone diving into literary studies, especially for an exam like UGC Net, where you need to crack open an author's techniques and the effects they create. This is when a part of something stands in for the whole thing. Example 1. All hands on deck. Explanation. In Herman Melville's Moby Dick, when the captain yells, "all hands on deck," he's actually calling for the whole crew to come up, using hands to mean everyone. It's a quick way to stress everyone's needed right now. Pronto. Example 2. The world was sad that day. In T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, saying the world was sad actually means the people around the speaker or society at large felt gloomy. It's using a big concept, the world, to reflect a more localized sentiment. Why it matters for UGC Net exam. Recognizing synecdoche helps in pinpointing how authors can use small parts to talk about bigger ideas or groups, key for digging deep into textual analysis. D. Periphrasis. This is basically talking about something in a roundabout way. The Scottish play. Explanation. In the theater, people call Shakespeare's Macbeth the Scottish play because saying the actual title is considered a jinx. It's a roundabout way to dodge bad luck. Example 2, the Bard of Avon. Calling Shakespeare the Bard of Avon is a fancy, indirect way of naming him based on where he was born, right by the Avon River. It's a poetic way to refer to him without just saying his name. Why it matters for UGC Net exam. Getting the hang of periphrasis is important for understanding how language can be used flexibly and creatively, especially when direct expressions are avoided for cultural, stylistic, or other reasons. Personal note, for the UGC Net English exam, getting a solid grip on literary devices like these is super important. They pop up all over the place, not just in questions focused on them, but woven throughout the exam's sections. Devices like metaphors, similes, irony, and symbolism are tools that give depth to literary analysis. Since they're frequently tested, diving deep into these concepts is a must-do for anyone aiming to ace the exam. Plus, mastering these tools will not only boost your scores in specific sections, but also enhance your overall understanding and analysis of texts. Question 74. In this setup, List 1 presents terms, and List 2 provides definitions. Correctly matching them helps in understanding their implications. List 1 terms: A. Ambivalence, B. Magic realism, C. Abrogation, D. Miscegenation. List 2 definition: 1. Rejection of a normative concept of correct or standard English. 2. Marriage or cohabitation by persons of different races. Complex mix of attraction and repulsion. 4. Inclusion of fantastic or mythical elements into seemingly realistic fiction. Here's the answer. A. Ambivalence is related to 3. A complex mix of attraction and repulsion. B. Magic realism is described by 4, including fantastic elements in realistic fiction. C. Abrogation is associated with 1, rejecting correct English norms. D. Miscegenation is defined by 2, interracial marriage or cohabitation. Let's dig into why these definitions are perfectly matched. A. Ambivalence means feeling two ways about something at the same time. It's like when you can't decide if you love or hate something because you kind of feel both. This idea pops up a lot in books to show characters who are really torn inside. For instance, in Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov is all mixed up about committing a murder. He flips between feeling guilty and justifying his actions, which adds tons of drama and depth to his character. Why it matters for UGC Net exam. Ambivalence is a cool concept that shows up in literary analysis because it helps us get why characters act the way they do, adding layers to the storytelling. Understanding this can help you tackle complex character studies in the exam. B. Magic realism is a style where magical stuff happens in the normal world, and nobody bats an eye. It's a fun way to mix the everyday with the extraordinary, often to dig into big social or cultural issues. Gabriel Garcia Marquez nails this in 100 Years of Solitude, where he throws in supernatural elements alongside the ordinary life of the Buendia family, giving us a surreal take on Latin American life and history. Why it matters for UGC Net exam. Magic realism can spice up a story while making serious points about society. Knowing how this works can help you understand how authors blend fantasy with reality to discuss bigger themes, which is a handy skill for literature analysis in the exam. C. Abrogation in post-colonial literature is all about kicking the dominant culture to the curb. It's about saying nope to the usual language, styles, and norms to redefine or reclaim a culture's identity. Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart does this by focusing on Igbo ways of life and sidelining colonial influences, making a strong statement about African culture standing on its own. Why it matters for UGC NET exam. Abrogation is key in post-colonial studies because it shows how texts push back against colonial powers. Getting this can help you analyze how authors from formerly colonized places write their own stories without Western filters. D. Miscegenation deals with the mixing of races through relationships, living together, or having kids. It's a theme used in stories to question ideas about race and identity. Loving Day by Matt Johnson is a great example, focusing on a mixed-race guy figuring out who he is in a world obsessed with putting people in racial boxes. It really throws shade on the whole idea that race has to keep people apart. Question 75. List 1 has works and List 2 lists their authors. It's essential to identify the correct author for each work. List 1 work: A. The Wretched of the Earth, B. Nation and Narration, C. Culture and Imperialism, D. Imagined Communities. 1. Benedict Anderson, 2. Homi K. Bhabha, 3. Edward W. Said, 4. Frantz Fanon. And the answer A. The Wretched of the Earth was written by 4. Frantz Fanon. B. Nation and Narration is the work of 2. Homi K. Bhabha. C. Culture and Imperialism is authored by 3. Edward W. Said. D. Imagined Communities comes from 1. Benedict Anderson. Let's explore further why these happen. A. The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. This book really made waves when it hit the shelves right before Fanon passed away in 1961. It's a big deal in the world of decolonization, and Jean-Paul Sartre even wrote the preface, which is pretty cool. B. Nation and Narration by Homi K. Bhabha. Bhabha has this great line in his preface: nations, like narratives, lose their origins in the myths of time and only fully encounter their horizons in the mind's eye. It's all about how stories and myths shape what we think about nations, kind of like how legends and tales shape our view of the past and future. Culture and Imperialism by Edward W. Said. Edward Said's book from 1993 connects a bunch of essays that talk about how imperialism and culture have been intertwined through the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. It's like a follow-up to his earlier book, Orientalism, and digs into how the Western world interacted with its colonies. Imagined Communities by Benedict Anderson. Anderson's work, first out in 1983 and updated a couple of times since, explores how nations kind of imagine themselves into existence. He introduces this idea of imagined communities, which has become a key concept in how we think about national identity and stuff like that. These books are gold mines for anyone diving into post-colonial and cultural studies. They all tackle big questions about identity, nationalism, and how empires mess with culture. Fanon's book gets into the nitty-gritty of what colonization does to people's heads. Bhabha talks about how nations are built a lot like stories are told. Said shows how culture and empire are super tangled up, and Anderson breaks down how nations are more of an idea than anything concrete. For anyone studying up for something like the UGC NET, where you need to get deep into how literature and culture mix with politics and history, these are must-reads. Why it matters for UGC NET exam. Understanding these works is crucial for anyone getting into literary or cultural studies, especially if you're looking at how cultures influence and shape each other. They provide key insights into the dynamics of post-colonialism, identity, and nationalism, common themes in advanced literary studies, and something you'll need to be on top of for exams like UGC NET. Question 76. We're looking at the publication order of various influential cultural and literary texts. Let's place these works in the correct chronological sequence based on when they were published. List 1 works: A. Culture and Society, B. Culture and Anarchy, C. To Hell with Culture, D. Studies in Dying Culture, E. Notes towards the Definition of Culture. Ready to dive into the timeline? Here's the answer. The correct order is A. Culture and Society, D. Studies in Dying Culture, E. Notes towards the definition of culture, B, culture and anarchy, and finally C, to hell with culture. Let's explore why this chronological arrangement holds up. Culture and Anarchy, an essay in political and social criticism, 1867 to 1868 by Matthew Arnold. Back in the day, Matthew Arnold threw out some essays in Cornhill magazine between 1867 and 1868, which later got bundled into a book with a new preface in 1869. This book, Culture and Anarchy, is Arnold's big hit, where he chats about how culture could help fix the social mess and class battles of the 19th century. He thought culture was all about chasing perfection and could really smooth out societal rough patches. His ideas set the stage for tons of debates about culture in England and pushed the notion that getting smarter and appreciating beauty could help everyone get along better and make progress together. Notes towards the definition of culture, 1948, by T.S. Eliot. In 1948, T.S. Eliot took a deep dive into what culture really means with his notes towards the definition of culture. He peeled back the layers to show how culture connects with religion, class, and where you're from. Eliot argued that if you really want to get culture, you have to look at how all these things mix together. He placed culture right in the middle of the bigger picture, how it shapes and mirrors a community's values and identity. To Hell with Culture by Sir Herbert Read, 1941. Sir Herbert Read shook things up with his 1941 essay, To Hell with Culture. As an art critic and theorist, Read was fed up with how society boxed in culture and turned it into a product. He was all for a more natural and true-to-self way of engaging with culture and making art. Read pushed for breaking culture free from all the usual constraints and highlighted how crucial art is for expressing ourselves and breaking free. Why it matters for UGC Net exam. Each of these works takes a critical look at culture from different angles, whether it's about refining society, understanding its deeper meanings, or breaking free from its commercial trappings. These perspectives are super valuable for anyone diving into cultural studies, especially if you're prepping for something like the UGC Net exam. Understanding these texts helps you grasp how ideas about culture have evolved and how they influence social and intellectual discussions, which is key for nailing the cultural studies sections of the exam. Culture and Society, 1958 by Raymond Williams. Raymond Williams's Culture and Society, which hit the shelves in 1958, takes a deep dive into how the idea of culture has changed in Great Britain from the 18th century all the way up to the 20th. He looks at all this through the lens of big events like the Industrial Revolution and the major social and political shifts that followed. Williams checks out what folks like Edmund Burke, William Cobbett, and William Blake had to say about culture, showing how their ideas evolved in response to the times. His big takeaway is that culture and society are in a constant back and forth, shaping and being shaped by each other through all these changes. Further Studies in a Dying Culture by Christopher Caudwell, publication date unknown. Christopher Caudwell's book, Further Studies in a Dying Culture, date not given, keeps the conversation going about how culture fits into a society that's seeing a lot of upheaval. Coming from a Marxist angle, Caudwell isn't shy about diving into how cultural stuff interacts with the big economic and social shifts going on. Even though we're missing some details here, it's clear his work gives a sharp critique of how culture reflects and wrestles with the deeper economic and social forces at play. Question 77. We need to determine the publication order of some of the most foundational literary works in history. Check out the list and match it to its publication timeline. List 1, literary works: A. Beowulf, B. Divina Commedia, C. Summa Theologica, La Morte D. Arthur, Canterbury Tales. Here's the chronological scoop. The order starts with A. Beowulf, followed by C. Summa Theologica, then B. Divina Commedia, next E. Canterbury Tales, and finally D. La Morte d'Arthur. Let's unpack why this sequence makes historical sense. Beowulf is an epic poem from Old English, rocking the Germanic heroic tradition with 3,182 lines that all rhyme in a specific way called alliteration. Although it's a major piece of Old English literature, scholars still argue about when it was actually written. What we do know is that the only manuscript we have was put together between 975 and 1025. The Summa Theologia, also just called the Summa, is a massive work by Thomas Aquinas, who lived from 1225 to 1274. He was a big deal theologian and has been named a doctor of the church, which means he was super important for Catholic theology. The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri is an Italian epic that Dante started around 1308 and finished in 1321, right before he died. It's a huge narrative poem that has had a massive impact on the world of literature. The Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer is a collection of 24 stories that add up to over 17,000 lines, all in Middle English. Chaucer was busy writing these from around 1387 to 1400. Le Morte d'Arthur is a Middle English story from the 15th century by Sir Thomas Malory, focusing on King Arthur, Guinevere, Lancelot, Merlin, and the Knights of the Round Table. It's believed Malory wrote this while he was locked up, finishing it around 1470, and it got its first printed run in 1485, thanks to William Caxton. Personal note, in the UGC Net English exams, knowing the timeline of these classic works is super important. They often ask you to put significant literary works in order, so having a handle on when stuff was written helps a lot in nailing those questions. Question 78. Let's arrange the following significant texts of Indian literary and rhetorical tradition in their order of publication. List 1, texts A. Bharat's Natya Shastra, B. Kshemendra's Asadiya Vicharacharcha, C. Bhama's Kavyalankara, D. Kuntak's Vakrokti Jivitam Ithvanyalaloka. And here's the chronological order. Starting with A. Bharat's Natya Shastra, followed by C. Bhama's Kavyalankara, next is E. Anandavardhan's Dvanyaloka, then D. Kuntak's Vakrokti Jivitam, and finally B. Kshemendra's Asadiya Vicharacharcha. Let's dive into the explanations to understand the development of literary criticism and rhetoric in ancient India. The Natya Shastra, between 200 BCE and 500 CE. This ancient guide, penned by the sage Bharata, is like the Bible of performing arts from back in the day, dating anywhere between 200 BCE and 500 CE. It's packed with 36 chapters and 6,000 verses on all you need to know about putting on a play, from writing and stage design to acting, costumes, and blending in music. It's famous for introducing the concept of rasa, which is all about pulling the audience into the performance to give them a spiritual and moral experience. This text was so influential that it got a major commentary in the 10th century by a guy named Abhinava Gupta, called the Abhinavabharati. Bhamaha, 7th century. Bhamaha was a poet in the 7th century who wrote Kavyalankara, or the Ornaments of Poetry. This work sheds light on how to jazz up your poetry with artistic touches. While he was mainly known through word of mouth until the early 20th century, the discovery of his manuscripts showed how big a deal he was in the Sanskrit poetry scene, hanging in the same era as another poet named Dandin. Anandavardhana, 820 to 890 CE. Around 820-890 CE, Anandavardhana came up with a game-changing poetry theory in his work Dvanyaloka, or A Light on Suggestion. He argued that the real magic of poetry is in its ability to suggest deeper meanings, creating an emotional vibe that requires the reader and writer to be in sync. His ideas got a big boost from another commentary by Abhinavagupta called Lokana, which helped cement this concept of suggestion as the heart of poetry. Kuntaka and the Vakrokti Siddhanta, 9th to 10th centuries. Kuntaka, from the 9th to 10th centuries, wrote about the Vakrokti Siddhanta, or the theory of oblique expression, in his work Vakrokti Jivitam. He believed that what makes creative literature special is its way of saying things indirectly, setting him up as a key player in Sanskrit literary theory, alongside big names like Anandavardhana and Abhinavagupta. Kshemendra, Auchidya Vichara Charcha, 11th century. Kshemendra was a jack-of-all-trades from 11th century Kashmir, poet, satirist, philosopher, historian, dramatist, translator, and art critic. His work, Auchidya Vichara Charcha, dives into the nitty-gritty of what makes literature work, showing off his wide-ranging impact on Sanskrit literature and intellectual thought. Why it matters for UGC Net exam, knowing about these scholars and their works is crucial for anyone diving into Sanskrit literature and its historical context, especially for exams like UGC Net. These texts and theories are foundational, helping us understand how literary ideas and forms developed over centuries in India. They are typically highlighted in the exam, reflecting their importance in the broader study of literature and cultural history. Question 79. This task involves placing Richard Hogarth's works in the order they were published. Review the list for accuracy. List 1 works of Richard Hogarth: A. An Imagined Life, B. The Uses of Literacy, C. Higher Education, Demand and Response, D. A Local Habitation, E. A Sort of Clowning. Here's the answer. The sequence starts with B. The Uses of Literacy, followed by C. Higher Education, Demand and Response, then D. A Local Habitation, next E. A Sort of Clowning, and finally A. An Imagined Life. Let's explore further why this chronological lineup is significant for understanding Hogarth's impact on cultural studies. The Uses of Literacy, written by Richard Hogarth and released in 1957, digs into how mass media has changed things across the UK. It's a big deal in the English and media studies worlds and really helped kick off the whole cultural studies scene. Hogarth looks at how media has transformed British culture, moving everyone towards a more uniform culture while pushing out the rich, diverse city vibes that people used to have. After that, Hogarth kept busy with works like Higher Education and Cultural Change, A Teacher's View, 1966, where he talks about how college and cultural shifts play off each other based on a lecture he gave at the University of Newcastle. Contemporary Cultural Studies, An Approach to the Study of Literature and Society, 1969, explores how literature impacts society and was part of his work at the University of Birmingham's Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies. He also wrote some personal stuff in autobiographies like A Local Habitation, 1918-40, A Sort of Clowning, Life and Times, 1940-59, and Imagined Life, Life and Times, 1959-91, giving us a peek into his own life through the big changes. Townscape with Figures, Farnham, Portrait of an English Town, 1994, captures what Farnham, a classic English town, is all about. A Measured Life, The Times and Places of an Orphaned Intellectual, 1994, and The Way We Live Now, Dilemmas in Contemporary Culture, 1995, which got a new title in 1997 as The Tyranny of Relativism, Culture and Politics in Contemporary English Society, dive deeper into modern cultural messiness and the role of intellectuals in all that. Question 80, we need to sort the following significant Indian novels by their publication dates. Each work has made a notable impact on Indian literature. List 1, novels. A. R.K. Narayan's The Financial Expert. B. Manohar Malgankar's A Bend in the Ganges. C. Raja Rao's Kantapura. D. Shashi Tharoor's The Great Indian Novel. E. Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things, and the chronological lineup is, it begins with Raja Rao's Kantapura, then A. R.K. Narayan's The Financial Expert, followed by B. Manohar Malgankar's A Bend in the Ganges, next, Shashi Tharoor's The Great Indian Novel, and lastly, E. Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things. Let's dive into the explanations to see how each of these novels contributed uniquely to the fabric of Indian literary history. Raja Rao, an Indian-American writer born on November 8, 1908, and who passed away on July 8, 2006, made a big name for himself in English literature with his novels and stories packed with deep, thoughtful themes. His partly autobiographical book, The Serpent and the Rope, 1960, dives into the search for spiritual enlightenment across Europe and India, earning him huge props and the Sahitya Akademi Award in 1963. Rao's work covers a lot of ground in terms of genres, and he even snagged the Neustadt International Prize for Literature in 1988 for his broad and impactful contributions to both Indian English literature and the worldwide literary scene. Some of his standout works include Kantapura, 1938, The Cow of the Barricades, 1947, Changing India, an Anthology, 1939, Tomorrow, 1943-44, Wither India, 1948, The Serpent and the Rope, 1960, The Cat and Shakespeare, A Tale of India, 1965, The Policeman and the Rose, 1978, Comrade Kirillov, 1976, On the Ganga Ghat, 1989, The Chessmaster and His Moves, 1988, The Meaning of India, 1996, The Great Indian Way, A Life of Mahatma Gandhi, 1998, The Best of Raja Rao, 1998, Shtas 5 Indian Masters, 2003. Then we have R.K. Narayan's The Financial Expert, 1952, which happens in Malgudi and centers around Margaya, a clever financial advisor who hangs out under a banyan tree. The story explores Margaya's big dreams and his eventual downfall with a psychological twist. Manohar Malgankar's A Bend in the Ganges, 1964, spans from the 1930s civil disobedience up to the 1947 partition, capturing the drama and challenges of India's fight for independence, with inspiration from a touching scene in the Ramayana. Shashi Tharoor's The Great Indian Novel, 1989, offers a witty spin on the Mahabharata set against the Indian independence movement, mixing historical figures with mythological elements and full of smart references and puns. Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things, 1997, set in 1960s Kerala, weaves the tale of a family's downfall with themes of politics, race, religion, and class. The book, which won the Booker Prize, is famous for its beautiful writing and the tragic story of twins Esta and Rahel, and the devastating death of their English cousin that brings caste issues to the forefront through their friend Velutha. Why it matters for UGC NET exam, understanding the works of these authors is essential for anyone diving into the study of modern Indian literature, especially for the UGC NET exam. These books offer a rich exploration of India's complex social and political landscape through compelling narratives and are often highlighted in the syllabus for their cultural and historical significance. This makes them key reading for comprehensive exam preparation in English literature. That wraps up our discussion for today. In our next sessions, we'll be diving into questions 81 to 90, so make sure you're ready for that deep dive. If you need the PDFs of today's material, feel free to WhatsApp us at 9645160045. And if you found this session helpful, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, and drop a comment below to let us know what you think or what you'd like to see next. Your feedback helps us improve and keep the content coming your way. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.